What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Everything We Know. You guys seem to really like the first episode on Piper, which you could find by clicking the I in the top right corner. Settlements have been one of the most hyped features coming to Fallout 4. In short, they give you the ability to design, build, and populate your very own town, or prison, or really whatever else you want to make it. I feel like at this point I should mention Real-Time Settler. This is a mod for Fallout 3 and New Vegas, and it basically did this. It allowed you to create your own settlement, and I find it very hard to believe that this mod had no influence on this addition of settlements in Fallout 4. If you find yourself struggling to wait for Fallout 4, I would definitely recommend checking out this mod to kind of hold you over for a few more weeks. But with that, settlements. What do we know? It has been repeated over and over that settlement creation is optional. You do not need to create one of these things to progress through the story or anything like that. Despite this, settlements will spread into the normal game if you choose to go down that route. We currently know of two perks that will pertain to settlements. Hacker, which will allow you to construct a terminal in your settlement, and Local Leader, which allows you to construct a trading stand in your settlement. So this is actually going to create an interesting dynamic with settlements. In order to progress your settlement past a certain point, you're gonna have to level up your character outside of the settlement. You're gonna have to do quests and kill some animals or whatever to get experience to unlock these perks. As far as the founding of your settlement, it's actually unclear if it will cost any caps or materials to create it, or if you need to be a certain level or anything of that nature. What we do know is that placing structures will require scrap. Scrap itself is broken up into a number of different categories, including cloth, steel, wood, and there's some other things, but I'm not gonna bore you with all of those. You'll find them out once you start playing the game. You get each of these materials by basically scrapping what you find in the world. So let's say you find a tire on the ground. You can scrap that for 2 rubber, and then you could use that rubber to build something in your settlement. You can actually even scrap entire buildings. So I imagine there's going to be some limitations as to which buildings you can and cannot scrap, but that should be a pretty interesting dynamic. So now you started your settlement, but what can you put into it? We currently know of 2 categories of things you could build: constructible items and resources. The different kinds of constructible items include structures, so this is your walls, floors, and roofs. They actually come in different materials too, so you could have a wood wall, a steel wall, etc. There's furniture, so beds and couches and things like that. Decorations, this is actually the doghouse falls into this category, as well as mounted Brahmin heads, if you're into that kind of thing. I'm not gonna judge. And finally, stores, and the only store we know of so far is the trading post. So the trading post is actually a pretty interesting building. It allows you to trade with other settlements, which I imagine is going to generate you some caps, as well as you could actually trade in between your own settlements. So let's say you have 2 settlements in 2 different locations, you could send Brahmins in between those 2. And honestly, the easiest way to explain this is to quote Todd Howard. He said, "People will arrive, including certain traders. They will have some of the best items in the game." That sentence basically speaks for itself. You're going to want to build a trading post. So now resources. These actually fall into the dependencies and necessities categories for your settlement, and we'll get a little bit more into this later. But basically we have food, which is obviously going to be the various types of plants and things that generate food; water, which is basically water pumps; power, which is going to be generators, lights, cables, switches, all things of that nature. You're actually going to need to connect these all with different kinds of cables. So if you have a generator here and you want to have a light over there, you're going to have to run a little power line from one to another, which is actually quite a cool process if you ask me. Defense, so this is going to be different kinds of turrets and mortars and guard towers. And something interesting we actually know about defense is you can automate these turrets with a terminal, which we talked about earlier. We don't know what category the terminal falls into yet, but you can program turrets, program lights, and everything with the terminal. That should be a pretty cool dynamic. You definitely get some customization going on there. And we also know your settlement will be attacked. That's why having these 2 things is going to be really important. We don't really know the circumstances of these attacks yet. Like, are you going to have to piss someone off for an attack to come, or are they just going to come because you have a settlement? What we do know is that these attacks will come and be dependent on your settlement size. So if you have a huge settlement, the attacks will be pretty big. So how do you build all of these wonderful things? Well, each thing's actually going to have its own set of components. Take a bookcase, for example. To build a standard size bookcase requires 3 wood and 1 steel. There are also limited places in which you can construct your settlement. There are multiple sites around the world that you can build them, and of course in varying sizes. So in other words, you can't just build your settlement anywhere, which isn't exactly the greatest news, but it's understandable. You don't want to build it next to the biggest town or next to a otherwise important location. From what I understand, the locations that you can build them are going to be plentiful, and there's going to be a lot of diversity between them. So I wouldn't stress about this too much. So let's talk a little bit more about necessities. Each settlement has 8 different types of necessities: people, food, water, power, safety, beds, happy, and size. Each of these categories are pretty self-explanatory. Like, beds are how many beds your settlement has, food is how much food is being produced, and the size of the amount of land your settlement can take up. Like many base building games, these things are going to be dependent on one another. It's actually pretty difficult to verbally explain how they're all interconnected, so I'll give you a few examples. Let's take people for example. People is the population of your settlement. In order to get more people, you need water, food, beds, and happy. Those are the dependencies. Now let's say water, food, and beds are all a dependency threshold, but happy is holding you back. How do you improve happy? Well, happy is dependent on beds, power, and size. As you can see, each of these requirements are dependent on one another. I created this little diagram to try and visualize how they all tie together. It is linked in the description also, so you don't have to worry about it disappearing on screen. But basically, as you can see, in order to improve one thing, you're gonna have to make sure to improve all the other things. And everything is tied together. You can't ignore one aspect of it and hope everything else will just grow on its own. So 2 of these dependencies are actually a little bit more dynamic: happy and technology. Happy depends on size, but size in regards to luxury. So if you build nicer, more expensive things in your settlement, happiness will increase, not just more things. So it has to be quality over quantity here. On the flip side, certain items in power are unlocked through technology. So if you don't have the necessary tech, you can't build the higher tier power collectors. I imagine this is also true for some of the other categories, like building a higher tier water pump, although I can't say for certain because we've only seen the higher tier power collectors. And that's pretty much everything we know about settlements. It's a pretty complex topic, so hopefully I explained everything in some easy to understand detail. If I missed anything, make sure to comment down below so I could add an annotation or something like that. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed. I thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.